Now for our guest please. Both of the topics addressed today are of interest to our Immigration and Human Rights Committee and others in LI. Some of us have been working on various aspects for a while. If after hearing the speakers you're interested in these topics, there's sign-ups in the back of the room. You can just put your name on and we'll keep you on the line. Up first is John Lindsay Poland, who will be explaining AB 481, which came into law in 2021. John is a researcher, advocate, and analyst focused on human rights and demilitarization, especially in the Americas. He is currently co-director of the California Healing Justice Program of the American Family Service Committee. He is also involved in Care First Jail's Last Coalition and was a speaker at an LI General meeting a couple of years ago when we were still on Zoom during the pandemic. So, and in his spare time, he comes out on the Sunday to talk to us. Good job.
Greetings. It's really great to see you on Sunday afternoon. Thank you for coming out on Sunday afternoon. So I'm going to talk about police militarization. One of the things I want to say about this is that, policing all across the country, Livermore, Alameda County, California are not unique, is disproportionately practiced against Black and brown people. And more people are harmed by policing, more people are criminalized by policing, Black and brown people. And so when we talk about militarization, we can think about it in terms of practices, we can think about it in terms of training, we can think about it in terms of who is on the police force, we can think about it in terms of the equipment, which is what I'm going to talk about mostly. But all of it is a force multiplier, right? So if you have more militarized equipment, it is multiplying the capacity for the use of force or the use of violence by law enforcement. And so if policing is disproportionately practiced against Black and brown people, then militarization is going to multiply that force against Black and brown people. So thinking about that as we proceed, and we'll look at a lot of different things. I'm not going to talk about many cases of the use of this stuff. I'm going to talk more about what is the decision-making in a community about what is okay, what is the type of militarized policing that is acceptable and what is not acceptable. Because a lot of times people think about, well, they shouldn't have X or Y or Z, or they should have A or B or C. But a lot of times what we're actually looking at is when should it be used? Maybe it's okay for some things, but it's not okay for other things or in other situations. So I want to just emphasize that as we go forward. And our program, we don't only focus on this, we also promote restorative justice programs across the state and within where we are in Oakland. I'm based in Oakland and in Alameda County. And so we're running webinars and cohorts in order to build capacity within our community for restorative justice practices, so that not just at the court level or at the judicial level, but in our own communities, we have a better capacity to address any kind of transgression, whether it's a criminal infraction or not, using restorative practices. We also, as Helen mentioned, are active in the Care First Jail's Last policy and the community coalition that is promoting that policy, because we know that so many of the people who are in Alameda County's jails are mentally ill or have a substance use issue and have been criminalized instead of being treated, instead of receiving care, instead of getting housing. And so we focus a lot on budget, but when I talk a little bit more about militarization in the jails, that will also be particularly relevant. And finally, before I talk about militarization, we are nationally an American Friends Service Committee, which is a Quaker peace and justice organization, operates internationally, it's existed for more than 100 years. We are promoting people to take a pledge to think twice before calling the police. What that means is think through, what is the situation that I would be calling about? Again, we might think about the most extreme situations, but those are not the primary situations in which law enforcement is called in. Law enforcement is called in for many, many, many mundane things. And so this pledge is really at the level of community to help us to begin to deconstruct our own, inside our own minds, how this works when we turn to somebody with a weapon and a badge for something that perhaps we could address ourselves, perhaps doesn't need to be addressed, or perhaps could be addressed by someone else. And we do have this, online. Okay, so a couple of years ago, we've been working on police militarization for a while, and we started doing some research in order to try to understand what is the level of militarized policing that is occurring across the state. So we submitted more than 300 Public Records Act requests to more than 200 law enforcement agencies all across the state, all 58 sheriff's offices, and other police departments all across the state, in order to see what militarized equipment they've acquired. And a lot of times people think about this as stuff that came from the Pentagon, right? The 1033 program is a federal program that gives surplus military equipment to law enforcement agencies. But we were interested in finding out not only what people were getting from that program, but also what are the law enforcement agencies buying? Or what are they getting through other types of grant programs? And as it turns out, most of this stuff is purchased. But there was no eyes on it. There was no civil, governing body review of those purchases. It's hidden away in a budget, in an operating budget for most law enforcement agencies. Sometimes a big armored vehicle that is a very high-ticket, high-cost item might go before city council or county supervisors, but most of the stuff was not going before that. So when in 2021, state law AB 41 passed through the legislature, was signed by the governor, we began to work on not just using our research, but also trying to support communities that are trying to implement this law. So what does the law do? It is a transparency and accountability law. So it makes transparent militarized equipment that law enforcement has and use policies that they have for it. Because it requires all law enforcement agencies across the state, city, county, and even state agencies, transit police, school agency police, to disclose what is the militarized equipment that they have, and what are the authorized uses for it, what does it cost, and then it requires an annual report on how it has been used, how much it's been used, what were the purposes of its use, and so on. And so this opened up, all of these things are submitted to the governing body, so that's a city council, in the case of a city, or county supervisors in the case of the county. And then in a public hearing, those bodies must consider the equipment acquisitions or continued use, as well as the use policies. And that use policies piece is very key, because to be honest, most equipment, militarized equipment, is not challenged, even by communities, much less by elected officials. But how it is used is a key piece of the policies that are required by this. And this is just in Hayward, the Hayward Community Coalition organized when this policy was up before their city council, and this was their public comments where they were giving the report cards. They were like saying, okay, we're grading you as members of the city council on how you respond to 3 key questions that we have about police accountability and militarized policing. And I think it was pretty effective. So what is covered by this? Again, this is not just stuff that's coming from the Pentagon, so it includes any kind of armored vehicle, it includes assault rifles, it includes tear gas and other chemical agents, flashbang grenades, often used in SWAT operations. It includes drones and robots. It includes explosive breaching devices, so when a SWAT team is going to break open a door, for example. And these things on the lower right, which is known as an LRAD, a long-range acoustic device, which has been used sometimes at protests, and it is dangerous because it can permanently damage people's hearing if used at close range and right in front of someone. So again, however these things are acquired is covered by AB 41. So just to give an example here in East County, what we have learned from this is that the Livermore Police Department has an armored vehicle, has a robot, 108 assault rifles, 13 projectile launchers, which were not in the photos, but these are, things that fire like rubber bullets or other types of projectiles. They're basically pain compliance weapons in order to get people to comply with law enforcement. In the coming year, Livermore PD hopes to get more flashbangs, more assault rifles, and more launchers. Pleasanton PD also has an armored vehicle, has a couple robots, 98 assault rifles, and 94 projectile launchers. And I have a quote here from Pleasanton PD's authorized uses. For assault rifles, it's to, quote, address lethal threats with precision from a distance. Very broad. Very, very broad. For armored vehicles, when there's an elevated threat of encountering armed resistance. However, when Pleasanton City Council was considering the military equipment policy, there was discussion, and Pleasanton is probably more conservative than a lot of cities, particularly in Alameda County. But there was more discussion, I would say, in the Pleasanton City Council than most city councils. And what was the subject of that discussion? One of the city council members said, I don't think it's such a great idea to bring the armored vehicle when there are children around, to public events when there are children around, to community events. And the chief said, well, it's a really good community engagement tool. So that's not when there's a threat of encountering armed resistance. That's really not. The city council in the end said, yes, you can use it for community events when children are present. The majority did. But again, this is where we are sometimes in a struggle to really define authorized uses that the community believes are legitimate. Now, these numbers are here, but the Alameda County Sheriff's Office has 450 assault rifles, 11 robots, 58 launchers, 156 drones, 4 armored vehicles, has also lots and lots of different munitions for tear gas and other types of chemical agents. So that's particularly relevant in an unincorporated county because that's where the Sheriff's Office, of course, is the patrolling law enforcement agency. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit now about how these things are used in places that are not visible, which is jails and prisons. So you might think about these things in a SWAT raid, or you might think about these things at protests, and that's where often the protest people get very upset. But the use in jails and prisons is much, much more common. So these projectile launchers are being used hundreds of times every month in California state prisons. And the state prison agency is spending millions of dollars, much, much more money on these types of weapons for the state prisons, for a population that's less than 100,000 people, right? So, we're especially concerned about that because the policies for the state prison agency for use of these things is also very, very open, not clear, and very broad. We do have some data on how it's been used in the state prisons. So this is a graph of the last 2.5 years of the use of force in state prisons. The number of times force was used in state prisons, and you can see it's per month about 800 or 900 times, 700 to 900 times. And it's on a slow growth. The brown parts of the bars is pepper spray, very, very commonly used. The purple part is physical force, so body force. And then the green part is the impact projectiles, which is also, on the order of 1 to 200, between 100 and 250 times a month. And so we're particularly concerned about that use and finding out more about it and trying to prevent it from happening. One reason why is because it's primarily used against mental health inmates. People in prison who have a diagnosed mental illness are the primary persons who are being impacted 75 to 80% of the time in these uses of force in state prisons. So that's people who have been sentenced, right, in state prisons. In the county jail in Santa Rita, we're particularly concerned about uses of force. And there's one type of weapon that the county sheriff has in particular that we are very mobilized about, which is a projectile weapon. So it's a munition that's launched from a firearm, it's less lethal. But when it leaves the barrel, it disperses. So into pellets or smaller pieces. And so that means that it's indiscriminate. You cannot aim it properly. If you're going from a distance and you're trying to stop one particular person from doing something, you cannot aim it properly at that one particular person. If you're close up and you're aiming it, you cannot avoid hitting the head, neck, or groin, which are particularly prohibited as targeted areas of the body under state use of force law. So, and there's another new state law, AB 48, which severely restricts the use of projectile weapons as well as chemical agents for crowd control. So our question is, okay, if it's very restricted for use in crowd control, it's not appropriate to use in the jail, you shouldn't have it. So on September 28th, there was a public protection hearing of the Alameda County Board of Supervisors. There's information in the back about this. And we really hope that people will dial in on that day, on that Thursday morning, or write supervisors, all of the supervisors, to say that these weapons should be prohibited for Alameda County. This is just a testimony because I did speak with somebody inside Santa Rita Jail who has been there for a couple of years, who talked about the use of these weapons inside Santa Rita. Part of it too is that, yes, it's an indiscriminate weapon. It's also when it's used, often it's a team coming in. So it's all these guys who are dressed all in black, they're masked, they've got all this different equipment on, they've got the weapons. Because they're masked, the prisoners can't see, do I even know these people? Do I know them as guards? Are they coming from outside? So it's very scary, and sometimes they're firing these projectile weapons inside a 7x7 cell. So this guy talked about someone who was severely mentally ill, who was assaulted, right? But they were using this against him inside his cell, and he lifted up his shirt and had like these 4 to 6 inch bruises on his midriff. So that's just the physical part of it. And this is, the sheriff is requesting more of these weapons. So they already have them. And what is before the supervisors this month is an increase in their number of these particular types of munitions. And we're saying not only should you reject the idea of getting more, but they should be prohibited entirely. Again, just another producer, manufacturer's information about these things. These are rounds that, again, when they leave, there's different numbers of them inside the munition. There might be up to 18 of them that release after they leave the barrel. They have been used in protests as well. So in Oakland, 2020, during the protests around George Floyd's murder, they were used. And of course, if they do hit someone in the head, whether it's a multi-projectile ammunition or a regular, less lethal, if it hits someone in the head, it can definitely make people blind and cause a lot of permanent damage. So I'm going to leave it at that for the moment. We have more information in the back. I would love to be in touch with you after this, and we can provide more information. We can help you speak to Supervisor Albert and other supervisors about these issues. And I guess we'll do a short Q&A.
Any questions for John?
Yes.
Well, it appears that the Sheriff's Department has many more of these various armaments. What's to stop cities from borrowing those? Doesn't the Sheriff's Department provide backup for cities?
Very good question. One of the things in AB 41 is that it does apply to the use of militarized equipment that another agency is lending, if another agency comes into their jurisdiction. And it generally would be what is called mutual aid, right? So, and they generally have to have a policy for that circumstance. However, most of the cities say if another agency comes into our jurisdiction and is using militarized equipment, they will apply their own militarized equipment policies because they are required to have those policies as well. So that means that the least restrictive policy is likely to apply. So that is part of the policy that goes up before the City Council every year, and it can be contested. In Oakland, we got a little bit better policy as a result of contesting that, but it's difficult to.
I was going to ask the issue of the use of projectiles, especially in a small cell for people with mental illness, seems like just barbaric to me. What used to be done, and so just the access to all these more lethal weapons that is driving this, or what? How did they used to deal with prisoners like that?
I'm not entirely sure. I think there was more use of physical force before, like body, try to force someone to do something. And I think law enforcement believes that this is a less dangerous way of going about it.
For who?
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. Yes. I mean, that's often, that is it's a key point because the narrative is often, well, we have to protect our officers, and the elected officials defer to the safety of the officers. And the safety of others is often discounted or just not in the picture. These scattershot weapons, for example, are only used by some agencies. Less than a quarter of the largest law enforcement agencies in the state even have them. I also think another piece of this is that a lot of people are in jail who should not be because they have a mental illness and they've been criminalized and they didn't get the care and the treatment that they needed and they shouldn't be there. And so law enforcement in that situation is really being placed in a situation where they're trying to force something, and that's their training, right? It's force. So they're trying to force something instead of providing treatment, which is what they should be getting in another setting in the community. Yes.
The scattershot weapons, do they kill people or just blind them?
There are cases of less lethal munitions killing people. Generally, if they are fired at a closer range and if it hits someone in the head. I don't know of cases here, but there are definitely cases globally. And so there's We work with an organization, the Physicians for Human Rights, that together with Amnesty International is trying to ban the scattershot munitions globally. And so we're hoping that the struggle against these particular munitions in Alameda County can set a precedent. Los Angeles PD, for example, has more than 25,000 of these scattershot munitions. The State Prison Agency has many. They haven't disclosed how many. So if we can begin to sort of wage that conversation and struggle here, hopefully it will set a precedent for other places.
The information that you showed today, is that online?
Some of it, a good part of it. We have, if you go to afsc.org/AB481, you'll see a lot of stuff.
And this is being recorded, so you'll have access.
There you go. Yes.
Okay.
John, didn't there used to be something called a bean bag?
There still is.
And is that safer? Is it effective? Are they not using that?
So a beanbag munition is also a less lethal munition. It might be made of foam or other synthetic material. It is fired from a launcher. Generally, a beanbag munition will not be a scatter shot because of its size. So, like other less lethal munitions, like the same question, it can harm people very seriously if it hits them in the head. There's a case in Oakland, for example, of someone who was at a protest in 2011 and was shot by, I think it was a beanbag, or if not, it was very similar, in the head at fairly close range and got permanent brain damage. Scott Olson. So it's a pain compliance weapon. That's the way law enforcement is trying to use it. They're trying to make things painful enough that people will obey them. And if any weapon like that can be used extremely. And it's about pain. I don't know what else to say about it. But part of that is like, is the use of it legitimate, right? Is the situation in which it's being used legitimate? Which is why AB 48, this other law that was passed after the George Floyd protests, significantly restricts the use of both the projectile weapons as well as chemical agents in any kind of crowd control situation. It requires many, many different steps by law enforcement. Can't be used in any situation, only when there is an objective, things are objectively out of control, and prohibits certain types of use. So, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. Yes.
First of all, I'm very concerned about the use of some of these munitions in a confined area like jails and with people with mental health, addiction problems that should not even be there. But I do wonder, as if I look at it from the police side or that side, I would wonder, okay, you say these are additional munitions, but how many are really additional and how many are replacing munitions that are going to be discarded?
So the request by the Sheriff's Office details that question exactly. And so in our information here, you can see they're requesting additional inventory. So it's not just replacement; they want more inventory. There are some things that they're replacing, but in terms of the scattershot munitions, it's very clear that they want hundreds and hundreds more in their inventory.
John, do you have information on how Alameda or California compare with other states? So, for example, conservative states have more, or do they have less militarized equipment?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, this law doesn't exist in any other state. It has invested very heavily in militarized equipment all across the country. They have invested in armored vehicles, in assault rifles, in the less lethals, in drones and robots. I mean, drones and robots are probably the fastest growing type of equipment that law enforcement is acquiring. with very little oversight or policy on, and so the narrative becomes very important because when law enforcement goes before the community or goes before elected officials, they say, well, we need this for extreme situations. There's been this or that situation. Or we need drones for fire rescue, which may be the case, right? But if the policy doesn't say this is for these situations, then it can be used to gather, to surveil, it can be used in ways. And of course, when things go wrong, when things go really bad in a law enforcement operation, somebody maybe gets killed, you often hear about the DA found that there was no violation of policy. The policy becomes important in that situation because that's the line on which law enforcement is being measured. And so if things do go bad and the policy is wide open, they're fine. There's no accountability.
Well, I'm serving for the police chief's advisory, and Manny and I checked the police academy this spring, so we are a little bit more familiar with what's going on in Livermore, which is not too bad. So, for instance, the project 3 is disregarded and moving towards the being back so they can actually aim. So all those things were communicated to us. But when we went to the hearing, one of the questions we had was we had certain number of officers working on the ground, but the number of the assault weapons are so much bigger. So
I want to engage with law enforcement. Let's meet with the chief, And I really think that it's our elected officials who really need to step up, and we need to make them step up. So, and it's not really about the motivation of law enforcement, it's about the effect of these things. And so I think that's the questions that I would like to ensure that elected officials are representing community and not just representing law enforcement. Because a lot of times in these conversations, that's what it seems like, is that city council is representing law enforcement. Like, we were the ones who elected you. And you need to represent us because who else will? And so I don't think it's a short conversation. It's an ongoing thing that has to be constructed over time. Relationships with our elected officials, I think, are really valuable in that, and just kind of deconstructing, because so often it is that worst case scenario, right? Well, there's this worst case scenario. You wouldn't want us to be without this, and actually, that is not usually what we are talking about.
yes, exactly, because the usage of these weapons in Livermore, present extremely low, almost never used, which is good, but then why do we need to have
Right,
so many?
exactly. How much do we need to?
Yeah. One question, and I think, I can't remember which discussion it was in, but taking away the human toll and mental toll of these things, there's an economic thing, that if Livermore, for instance, has a huge number of assault rifles, or whatever, or any town, that they need to replace them. They become old, they need new ammunition, all this stuff is antiquated and has to be replaced, but they never use it. So that's a lot of money coming out of city coffers, going for something that no one's using.
And in fact, the primary cost is not the equipment or the replacement of it. The primary cost is staff time.
Yeah.
Staff time for training, staff time. Because paying cops is expensive. Let's just be real. Paying cops is very, very expensive. And so that is something that we are pushing also in the annual reports for AB 41, that they're required to report on the fiscal costs, including personnel time, including training. And most agencies are not doing that. A few have. So that's the big cost, because when it's a primary tool, and they train on it, and they cleaned it, and they maintained it, and they're spending that time not doing other things. So, yeah.
One more question. So my understanding is that AB 481 is fairly comprehensive, at least in terms of the equipment that's covered by it. Do you agree with that, or is there equipment that police departments and sheriff's departments use that aren't required to disclose pursuant to 481?
It doesn't cover tasers. There's a much more involved weapon called taser shockwave, that shoots tasers like a whole bunch of times. That's not very common, but the ordinary tasers are not covered, which maybe they should be. Any elected body can add equipment if they feel like this equipment should be covered, and we want that type of accountability for this type of equipment. So, for example, assault rifles are covered, but there's an exception if they are standard issue service weapons. So some agencies have said, oh, well, yeah, assault rifles are standard issue service weapons. In the case of Santa Cruz, there was a whole struggle about that, and the city council said, well, okay, you can say it's standard issue, we're going to add it to the list. And so any piece of equipment can be added to the list by the governing body. Were we okay on time? I don't know how we are.
I think one more. Jim, did you go?
Oh, there's somebody in the back, I think. Okay, that's an active question.
Okay, Christine.
Just a quick one. How well are agencies complying to this law and carrying out? What's being done about it?
Very uneven. Very, very uneven. The thing that I put up here about authorized uses is a big problem, because I said at the beginning that this is about community members having a say in what and when militarized equipment might be used. And authorized uses policies for many agencies name who is authorized to use them, who may authorize the use by others, or who is authorized to use them. And what does that do? It gives it right back to the law enforcement agency to decide what are the situations in which it would be authorized to be used. So that it basically takes away from any kind of community or civilian control over that line between authorized and unauthorized use. We worked with Assemblyman Joan Sawyer to do a statewide bill to try to improve that, and also to fill that loophole on assault rifles. And it's just gone into a 2-year bill. So we didn't quite have the votes. It got through the Assembly, got through Senate Public Assembly Committee, and we didn't quite have the votes in the full Senate. So it will come back next year. And in the absence of that, it is really up to communities to hold elected officials accountable for the law, for implementing the law.
Jim,
And we do have a lot of information on our site about those things, and we have tons of information if you want to consult us as well.
So it seems to me, I recall that Sheriff Ahern was in the vanguard of militarization of police forces. And is the new sheriff less so, or do you have any idea as to her?
Well, the request for more scattershot munitions is not a good sign. It's really not a good sign. I have heard some people inside Santa Rita say that they're not being used as much as they were before. But then why does she want more? So I think it's a little early to say. This militarization has been happening over decades in most agencies, and so I think she told you all, give me a year, right, and then come. So far, it's not looking great, I would say, but it's hard to tell exactly.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Derron Jenkins, and then James will address this. As background, Reverend Jenkins is from the Bay Area Christian Connection, Faith in Action East Bay, and the Coalition for Police Accountability. A Los Angeles native and youth minister for 20 years. He came to Oakland in 2015 and has been advocating with Allen Temple Baptist Church in 2017. And has been active since 2016 with, you notice how many things showed up around 2016, right? And just coincidental, I'm sure. And it's been active since 2016 with the Coalition for Police Accountability that won 2 ballot measures to create the Oakland Police Commission, the strongest law enforcement oversight body in the country. So, and
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I thank Helen for her invitation. I thank all of you for coming out this Sunday. You could be at home eating ice cream and pie, but instead you decided to come out here and spend a little time with us. I'm going to talk a little bit about Sheriff Oversight. I'm going to pass it over to my partner, Janks. Sacramento Democratic Assembly member Kevin McCarthy, not McCarthy, Kevin McCarthy came up with AB 1185 in the states in 2019, but never got a vote in the Senate after being passed by the Assembly. In the summer of 2020, in the midst of COVID-19 pandemic, the largest civil rights protest since the 1960s ripped the streets across the country, sparked by horrific police murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis. The protest focused on the need for police reform in California, as in many other states. A slate of bills hit the legislature. Following the 2020 protest, the bill passed both houses and was signed by Governor Gavin Newsom. The bill, AB 1185, lets every California county create an official watchdog group or individual to keep the local sheriff in line. That watchdog can be a sheriff oversight committee or an inspector general or both. The key provision of the law is that the sheriff oversight boards will now possess subpoena power, giving them considerable authority to investigate and expose misconduct by the sheriff department. After 68 deaths in the Alameda County Jail named Santa Rita since 2014 and the circumstances surrounding those deaths, culture of cruelty within the department, and confirmation of different supremacy groups within the department, many community residents and organizations are now saying, not in my county. First off, Sheriff Oversight is not about Yesenia Sanchez. Sheriff Oversight is about the office of the sheriff that has 1,000 plus sworn deputies. Some are out on contract for municipalities, which means those deputies have been hired by that city, been hired by that city to do a job, and therefore that city holds the authority to dictate the policies and operations of their municipality. However, the majority are not. It is that majority that AB 1185 affects. Civilian oversight has often been reactive. You know, the George Floyd, Rodney King, Tyree Nichols. Agencies created after a high-profile incident or scandal, responding primarily to individual complaints, reviews policies as a result of one or more complaints, emphasizing legalistic rules and so on. Civilian oversight now often includes proactive elements, which explores problems in proactivity, investigations, collections, analysis of data, identifies underlying issues and causes, focusing on organizational change, builds partnership with law enforcement, and so on. Strong oversight will build community confidence in county law enforcement. Weak oversight will send the wrong message, and residents will see it as a paper tiger to prevent genuine transparency, community engagement, and accountability. Voters are supportive and have participated in county events on Sheriff Oversight. There was substantial outreach and engagement with county residents in the community events and Sheriff Oversight. Unfortunately, today's presentation is not really demonstrating what our residents of the county of Alameda are saying. Today's presentation is encouraging you to take a good look at your county law enforcement and decide yourself whether oversight is something that you want to have in your county. Effective community oversight must include a full-time inspector with subpoena powers. I'm almost done here. It must include a full-time general inspector with subpoena power. Subpoena power is necessary to conduct independent investigations and develop substantial recommendations to the Board of Supervisors. A budget equivalent to, but not from, the Alameda County Sheriff's Department budget. To ensure adequate resources for Oversight Board, Inspector General staff, including investigators, and independent legal counsel. Independent legal counsel with no conflict of interest. That's why it's so important that we have independent legal counsel that has no conflicts of interest. Legal advice for the Oversight Board that is separate from the interests of the county. County counsel defends the county in lawsuits. There are many circumstances where defending the county will be in direct conflict with advising an independent oversight board. Independent counsel makes sure there are no conflicts of interest. The selection panel, which we are still negotiating about the selection panel. I believe the supervisors are going to pick 5, and then the community will be responsible for 2 or more alternates. But before I close, let me say this. On March 1st, 2019, a black family went to Starbucks in Castro Valley. They were traveling from Las Vegas, a 9 to 10 hour drive, if anyone ever driven that stretch before. For one of the members, they were driving because one of the members in the family of the car had her statistics exam to take at Cal State Berkeley. They stopped there to use the ladies' room and to get coffee and to prepare for the final 30-minute drive. Deputy Stephen Holland knocked on the door and told the family, the Lauderdale family, the 3 black females in the car, that he was investigating car break-ins and that their car fit the description of the assailants. And he wanted to see her driver's license. She refused and asked why. Make a long story short, other deputies arrived. They were forced out of the car, handcuffed, their car was searched. People were looking at them. They were embarrassed. A black family from Las Vegas, whose daughter, a young woman taking care of her college business, have been scarred emotionally, psychologically, when physically manhandled because a law enforcement officer, deputy for Alameda County, used his discretion to investigate. They were finally released, but the damage was done. Captain Daniel Brody of the Alameda County Sheriff, who conducted an internal investigation into the incident, testified in court that he believed the family's detention was lawful, but did not interview the deputies nor the Lauderdale family. The Alameda County Sheriff did not discipline the deputies. In fact, there is rumor that those deputies, Holland and another one, was promoted. Why is that important? Because the suspects of the car break-in were described as a black male and a Latino male driving a two-door dark gray hatchback, and the Lauderdale family was in a silver four-door sedan. Oh, and did I mention that there was a part where the deputies turned off the sound to their body cameras? That is an example of the discretion of the Alameda County Sheriff Office. And by the way, the federal judge called this incident racist and county council racist because of the way they handled the family. The jury awarded them $8.5 million after county council offered them $100,000. And then came back with a counteroffer of $700,000 after the jury awarded them $8.5 million. $700,000 wouldn't even cover their legal costs. They would have been in debt. And the lady who had to take her exam, her statistics exam, she passed. Got there 30 minutes late, but she made a C on the test. Dan?
Never go after a minister. The issue of Sheriff Oversight is coming before the Board of Supervisors on Tuesday. And after 2.5 years, they are going to vote on something that is so toothless that it has Nate Miley's enthusiasm. Seriously, I mean, like if Nate Miley is cheering for your proposal and it's a law enforcement issue, that kind of tells you where things are at. What Reverend Derron was saying about community engagement, I don't know if any of you participated. It was a series of meetings. I know, I'm sure at least Helen, our stalwart, was there. There were a series of meetings specifically on Sheriff Oversight that were organized by the Board of Supervisors. 250 people participated across the county. And so in the final report, the board basically says, well, we think they were advocates, so not really. We're going to ignore the community engagement we sponsored, right? It didn't really happen because they weren't real community. The Sheriff's Department also did a community engagement process when she took office. I don't know if any of you did surveys for her or any of that. She also had a couple of meetings. She wasn't even asking about Sheriff Oversight. And yet the report on the engagement process says one of the key things that came out of it is the community wants oversight, right? What is now being considered is very, very weak. I think it'll pass because Nate likes it, which means your guy likes it. But it also really speaks, I think, to the Board of Supervisors when you have three supervisors who have all articulated support for the issues, who are hiding behind each other and saying, oh, well, the votes aren't there. Well, if Carson says the votes aren't there, but he'd vote for it, and Marquez says the votes aren't there, but she'd vote for it, and Tam says the votes aren't there, but she'd vote for it, the way my math works, that's a majority. Who should be passing something much stronger, right? Just to very briefly talk about, I think what's going to happen kind of moving forward is we would very much appreciate anytime anybody is engaging with supervisors that they raise this issue. We're very disappointed that you didn't pass oversight. Nate Miley's position is we all support oversight, it's just the details, because he apparently started working on government policy issues 3 months ago and doesn't understand it's all about the details, right? They just need to continue to hear that voting for something that's toothless was really in some ways worse than doing nothing, because now they're going to spend a couple of $1 million on something that's not going to work and is not going to have the confidence of the community. Another man died in the jail last Wednesday. And this was a very, very preventable death. He was murdered by his son. And, you know, when I talk about the practicalities, it's really an effort to convince the folks in the middle, and sometimes people come up to me and say, but you know, it's also just an issue of humanity. The family has a lawyer already, because the specifics of the case were so outrageous, and they were so ignored, and they couldn't get good information. Before their brother and son was killed, and after, right? If you want to just shout somebody to a lawyer, that's how you do it. Just treat them as disrespectful as you possibly can. And so it's going to, again, cost the county money. I mean, this is the thing that kind of amazes me. I'm just trying to save the county some money, because a little bit of oversight could get us out of, you know, $500 million lawsuits, right? And if fewer people die, it will literally cost the county less money. So I didn't have it together enough to make slides like John, because I just don't have it that well together. But one of the things that kind of comes up with oversight is people are sometimes not comfortable talking about it because they haven't gotten all the specifics. They've come, they've heard everything. And so what I really want to say is this. They need independent legal advice. We come from Oakland, where we do in fact have an oversight board for the police. And here's what's amazing about it, even on its worst day. The police chief comes to the police commission meetings and has to answer a group of Oakland residents on a regular and public basis, right? It's really remarkable, and it happens almost nowhere else in the country, right? And I've been known to bring out-of-town visitors to the commission meeting. Look, they aren't that great. But what we know is that in order for that oversight board to work, they have to have independent legal advice. The county is always looking to protect the interests of the county and the interests of the sheriff, right? And they're doing it again. They're doing it in the story that Reverend Derron told. When something happens, their instinct is to protect the financial and legal interests of the county and the legal interests of the sheriff. So how are they going to advise an oversight board to say, yes, you have access, you have legal access to this information that's going to harm the lawsuit that we're trying to defend the county against, right? It is an unsustainable relationship. And why are the Board of Supervisors voting for the county council to be the lawyer for the oversight board? I've taken to calling it an oversight. So my kids are like, yeah, that's like a dad joke. But why are they doing that? They say, well, it's based on the legal advice we've gotten. Which they've gotten from county council, and county council said, you can't show this to anybody because it's confidential client material. And we're like, no, the Board of Supervisors is the client, not the lawyer, right? And the board is like, well, they say it's confidential. That's their legal advice, so therefore it's confidential. So they're literally going to make policy based on a secret document from county council that says that county council should be their lawyer in this instance, right? I mean, it's pretty insane, but there has to be independent legal advice, and it is legal. We have like real lawyers who say that, not just, you know, high school graduate Ann over here. But the first step is to have supervisors that listen to lawyers and demonstrate to the public what information they're basing their policy decisions on. Representation of who's on the board. So their current proposal, what's going to pass, is 7 people, 5 appointed by the Board of Supervisors, 1 each, and then 2 people from the community. What we know of oversight is that's a very small board. given the size of the county, given the number of different communities that you have in the county, that you would want to feel like they have a voice there. If you do oversight right, it's somewhere for people to go and to say, this is what's happening. And the moms and dads of people with severe mental illness that are in the jail, they just want to go and tell somebody, you've got to do something so that when they're in the jail, they get the medication. So they don't decompensate. And if you give them a place to go and talk about it and get it fixed, the jail's going to run better. People aren't going to die, and people are going to have a place to go and work it out. I mean, it really remarkably will work. But that's not the board that's being created, okay? So, for some reason, everybody's very concerned that there be law enforcement on the oversight. And I have tried to say to the supervisors that you can go into the most conservative community in Alameda County and say, can police police police? And people say, no, they cannot, right? So, this is like the most unifying position ever. But the board says we better put some police on the oversight board because they've done such a good job of overseeing themselves to this point. Right? They are proposing an inspector general. The problem is, honestly, at this point, it's just going to be trash. That's what you get from me on a Sunday afternoon. And there will be money, and it's going to be wasted money, right? That's just the way it's coming down. And what we're asking, I think, of residents of Alameda County is, by all means, come on Tuesday. So the board is meeting on Tuesday. It's in person, and it's also on Zoom. And at 2 o'clock is when they're going to be talking about Sheriff Oversight. And you really don't need to know the details. All you need to know is they're screwing it up, they've taken all the teeth out of it, and now they're saying we're doing oversight, and it's just not oversight, right? And what they're losing is transparency and good government. They're losing cost savings, and they're losing the community. And the community is not going to trust this. So, going back last week, there's going to be another scandal. And when that happens, you need to have something, some mechanism that people believe works. And that's what they are deciding not to do. And it's just a terrible shame. Maybe next year when the lady is on the city council, we're going to have city council pass things that say, we want oversight, right? There's got to be oversight. But it is happening on Tuesday. Where's money? Oh. And the great thing about me and Derron and the other folks is that we're a very haphazard group of folks that do this in our spare time. So if you sign up for information, I guarantee you're not going to get deluged because we just don't have the capacity to do it. But we will let you know about meetings and please call in. But also, literally, any meeting that you're at where there's a supervisor, you don't have anything to say to them, just go up to them and say, you're so disappointed. I am disappointed. Sheriff Oversight is a no-brainer. And what you pass isn't Sheriff Oversight.
Can you hold up that shows when the meeting is again?
And can I add one thing about no teeth to oversight? If the city of Minneapolis would have listened to their oversight board, and their oversight board would have had teeth, Derek Chauvin would have never murdered George Floyd. The oversight board flagged him 22 times, but nothing wasn't done about it. And that's not to say that oversight will stop everything that goes on. No, it's a deterrence. And it's also an invitation to work together with the law enforcement personnel within our city.
The other thing that oversight does is oversight can address policy, because as John was talking about, there's two things you have to prove that a police officer did anything wrong. That they were trained, right? And what the policy was. And being able to write policy, and being able to discuss policy and have a hearing on policy. And then find out what the training is and have a discussion about what the training is going to be moving forward is essential to ever disciplining any law enforcement officer for anything, right? The other thing, of course, that's essential is that you don't have a law enforcement officer on the oversight board. But that's yes, sir.
I'm going to get her name screwed up. There's a retired Superior Court Judge, Liddell.
Ladora's Court
Oh, thank you.
San Jose.
She actually, I think, was she audited the, I think, San Jose Police Department for some years. It might be very worthwhile to get her to make a comment about this, because she's very, very well informed and highly respected.
I'm familiar with the name, but there were conversations up and down the state about Sheriff Oversight, and I know they're doing it as well in her county.
Yeah, there's a statewide coalition of many counties who are pursuing sheriff oversight. Some are done, some are not, some are just getting started, but it's a pretty big coalition that's going forward. So, according to the brick walls that each county runs into, we share information and we figure out how to knock it down, throughout all the resources that we have through the state.
The problem is there's another statewide coalition, and that's the police unions. And they're a little bit better funded than we are. Yes?
So does the Alameda County resolution, as I call it, that's gonna pass this oversight board, does it say it must have law enforcement or it can?
It says it can. I guarantee you it will. I'll bet my husband's car.
But would that be supervisors appoint?
Or it can be the community appointees, depending. I mean, at this point, it's just like, it's gonna be trash. And it will, I guarantee you, it's gonna include law enforcement, because they not only, the language isn't silent on it, which would mean that you could appoint law enforcement, right? It explicitly says law enforcement are not excluded. Like, they went out of their way to say, let us be really clear, they're allowed to be on this, rather than remaining silent. And what I have seen over and over, anytime law enforcement is in the room, is they assert their authority and their superior knowledge. It's like when you're talking about guns, and you know the guy who's like, do you even know how to load an atomic weapon? No, we're pretty sure it fires bullets, right? They do that same thing of, you cannot have an opinion on what should happen because you've never read this and you don't know that and you've never been on the street, blah, 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 blah. And so it has an outsized influence. 1 in 7 is a lot more than 1 in 7. And the fact that you're just saying that you want law enforcement on oversight. The sheriff's office has an internal affairs department to review things that they're concerned about. And it's been doing a bang-up job. That's the police policing police. This is because that's not working, right? So, no, it doesn't say they're required to be on it, but they will be.
And in my opinion, law enforcement will be there to represent. If the sheriff or her designee will send a representative to the meeting every time there's a meeting to give their report on what's going on, that's your representative right there.
I mean, what we see in Oakland, and our police commission's been going since 2017, is they work closely with the police department and various representatives of the police department. When they're writing a policy, the police department is often in the room, you know, for the writing of the policy. So it's not like they're not going to have any voice at all, but they're not on the oversight board, right? And that makes all of the difference in the world.
Yes.
I'd really like to see some numbers when it comes to lawyers' fees, you know, how much lost cases cost. I mean, you throw out some numbers too, but do you know of a resource that shows those statistics for us locally, for California, nationally? You know, what happened last year? How many people had to pay out how much last year? That kind of statistic.
From what I know, I don't have all the statistics in front of me, but things like the Babu settlement, for how much was it? For $300 and some million?
That was for Stephanie.
Okay, that was for staffing. That's going on, the different lawsuits that are in progress now regarding the different jails that are in, the different jails, I'm sorry, the different people that have passed in the jails. Those lawsuits are moving forward. We don't have definite information about how much they're going to cost, but they're going to cost a pretty penny, just like the $8.5 million lawsuit that was just approved in March of this year by the federal judge. Things like that. But what I will do is I will gather some of that information and be sure that is available to you and anybody who requests.
I would appreciate it. It's a very powerful tool to argue what you're talking about.
Well, and just to add to what Lorraine said, of what I understood, maybe from you, that a lot of the expense, that there is the expense of the money that's actually paid out, that's given to somebody. But also, there's a huge cost in the lawyers that are defending the case. So, as you said, police are paid a lot. There's a lot of money that we don't even see that goes into fighting, giving the money, which they almost always lose. So it's a lot. Again, it's a lot of money that goes into something that could be avoided.
But it's also that you're not repairing the problem.
Right.
So you're
just
ensuring that you're going to do all of this again very soon.
Right.
Point blank, law enforcement goes to the police academy, and it could be your son or your daughter, and they're the perfect angel before they go into the police academy. They go into the police academy and they're cursed at, and they're told things that their mom and daddy are going to do to them that's totally untrue. They see videos of people who are going to or about to commit acts of violence upon them. They're like, oh my God, this is, but they are not presented with a person of the community. Hi, officer, how are you? Would you like some cookies? Oh, thank you for walking by. They don't train them because they want the officers focused they say, for you to come home safe to your family every day. So when they pull a person over, they take their gun out for no reason, or they put their hand on their gun, or they're talking to you. That's because I don't know who you are. I'm your neighbor. That's who I am. And did you go to your neighbor's house with a gun in your hand? Can I borrow a cup of sugar?
Not get the sugar.
So we as the people, just have to let our deputies know that we're human beings just like you are. And I know that you don't trust us, and there are things that you have to, do to keep yourself and your family safe, but we're both human beings. Let us start a dialogue together.
What authority does the Oversight Board ideally have in disciplining officers, or how is that handled? Because there's police unions and all of that. Like, how does that all work?
The Sheriff's Oversight will have absolutely no authority. That's why it was kind of funny for the sheriff, who, by the way, campaigned saying that she supported oversight. And then when she was in office, and my boss can attest to this, people don't always think they need to be overseen. But the sheriff sent her undersheriff to argue about two things. One, the Oversight Board doesn't really have any authority, which is true. All the Oversight Board does, or would do, even if it was a strong oversight, this is what's insane. The best oversight that what we were advocating for just reports to the Board of Supervisors, right? And if said, go to the oversight board, right? Don't bother us here, go to the oversight board. The oversight board would have the time and the, you know, and the resources to do serious investigation, serious reports, and bring it back to the board, right? But what the undersheriff argued, first of all, was it's not oversight because they don't have any authority, and it's imperative that we have law enforcement on it. And I was like, but why if it has no authority? So it's all about just reporting to the Board of Supervisors, because, I mean, part of the problem, aside from the fact that the Board of Supervisors doesn't want to look at things related to law enforcement and the sheriff, and denies that they have any authority, even though they have the purse strings, they also don't have the time. They've got a lot going on, whether they're doing it or not, and right, and so that's the point, is to have some group that's dedicated to this specific issue and can really dig in on it and bring it back to the board in a credible way. That's all that it was ever about, and they couldn't even tolerate that.
But isn't the Oakland board, doesn't the police chief report to that oversight committee?
So it's different because the sheriff is an elected position.
That's my point. So it can be different at every jurisdiction.
Well, yes, it can be different in every jurisdiction, but sheriff's oversight was always was never going to be as strong as you can have within a city oversight.
Okay.
Although most cities don't have it. But the only reason Oakland has this very strong oversight board is because the police were raping an underage girl when it was being passed. And so they weren't being very...
I thought it was actually not writers.
No, it was happening. Trust me, the city council of Oakland was still arguing, oh, I understand what you want to do, but we can't do that. And then the child rape thing happened, and they found Jesus, and they passed strong oversight, and the community voted for it by about 80%, right? So that's the reason Oakland has stronger oversight than most cities. But cities can have stronger oversight than counties because the sheriff is in the elected position.
I mean, for instance, I believe Dublin is contracting with the sheriff, isn't that right? Dublin has the power. Dublin can come and say, like, we want the sheriff to do this, and the sheriff, it's not actually the sheriff, it's the police department. Because when you go to the city of Dublin's website, it doesn't say Alameda County Sheriff, it says Dublin Police. Dublin is its own municipality. Castro Valley, on the other hand, is not. They're just an unincorporated area. So those who contract with it, they have the power to say, I don't want you to do this, I want you to do that, and they can do it. Whereas the unincorporated areas would have to go through, you know, hoops and raise bars to get their oversight done. But because it's Alameda County, we include everybody. But just know those who contract with the sheriff, they have the almighty God power. Yes, ma'am.
And they also get to pick their own police chief. Out of, it's not whoever's out there, they get to pick who is their police.
Just like a city of Oakland, you know, we don't want these officers, they're gone. You know, but if it was the county sheriff oversight was in effect, we couldn't do that. It has to go through the Board of Supervisors back and say, oh, well, let's talk to the sheriff. But if you contract, we want these people gone. They're out of there.
Anyone else? I will have one thing, and I think you all will agree with me. Having been in numerous Zooms with supervisors, that when we long ago had a forum, I had started having forums for supervisors. And to be perfectly honest, it's kind of embarrassing. We had to figure out what they do because none of us knew really what a supervisor did. And they were just kind of these people that were elected, and you kept electing the same people because you didn't know anything. Well, anyway, they have a huge amount of control, a huge amount of money. They control a huge amount of things.
$4 billion.
And I have been $4 billion, and I personally have been very disappointed in, which is an understatement, of any interactions I've had with the supervisors. They seem to coast really well.
And, I mean, really, the one thing that I think happens more than anything else in terms of people talking to the supervisors is feeling like, I don't ever have done this. there's an issue out there, but I'm not really sure of the specifics. From the supervisor's perspective, if you come up to me and say, oh, I'm so disappointed in what you did about Sheriff Oversight, and you get your facts wrong, they understand that there's a voter who heard something, hasn't quite got it right, but got this part of the message right. I screwed it up. And they're disappointed, right? And so really, anytime you're running into any supervisor, just express dismay about Sheriff Oversight. It was an opportunity to do something that was good government and transparency and, you know, real, actual opportunity to engage with police in an effective way, and they didn't do it. And the specifics don't matter. They didn't do it. And when they tell you, oh, the votes weren't there, well, you voted for it.
Yeah.
Right?
And there is someone running for Miley's place, for those of you who might be from Pleasanton or in his, we're Hobart.
Yes, but you know what Hobart consistently says? There's two things that Hobart consistently says. One is, oh, when it comes to public safety, I just do whatever Nate says.
Yeah, exactly.
And I mean, literally, I'm just like, I wouldn't really advertise that to my constituents that I don't, you know.
Yeah, would you say that again, like?
Hobart literally says, oh, if it's public safety, I just do whatever Nate Miley says. And I just like can't imagine tell your constituents that you don't have a thought. But anyway, the other thing that he does is every single time he meets, he pretends it's the first time he's hearing it. And that oddly, even though it's the first time he's hearing it, you've said different things before, and now he's very confused.
Yes.
So, and I'm like, well, wait, I thought this was the first time you were hearing it, so how could I have said something before? Because, but anyway, so those are the two things consistently with Hobart, but he needs to hear every time he comes out, oh, I'm so disappointed.
Yeah.
We had an opportunity for good government and Sheriff Oversight. You blew it.
He also says, oh, I understand exactly what you're saying.
Right.
Remember that. I am so on your side. And then 5 minutes later,
I'm just, you know, they just need to hear that there's disappointment and the specifics don't matter. Get it wrong, but just say you're disappointed, you're dismayed, and send them a message before Tuesday.
Yeah.
Right?
And I'd like to thank each and every one of you for putting up with. But one thing I want to say is the choice that you make could be something that will affect somebody years down the road.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And I will say from my point of view, this is not about whether you like your city police or you like your sheriff. It's just stuff that everyone should have a check and balances, however good they are, and they aren't going to be there forever. So it's just important to keep track of these things. And Marilyn, and thank you guys, all of you, initially here.
My name is Reverend Jenkins. Those of you know me, I guess. And I'm our kind of go-between person between Moms of Man Action and the more indivisible. And I just want to announce we have 2 important announcements that happened last week. 2 bills were passed in the state of California. One is AB 28, which is a bill that has a moderate tax on the firearm industry. It's not on firearm sales, it's on the industry itself of 10%. And the funds for that are to go to pay for, among other things, nonviolence community programs, such as one example is Youth Alive in Oakland, who their mission is to interrupt the cycle of violence, and they're very effective. Unfortunately, we don't have too many such programs in the state of California because our state has not had the funds to approve programs that have been requested. This is to help do that, and it's now on Governor Newsom's desk. We ask you to please send an email or call Governor Newsom, ask him to sign AB 28. AB 28. The other one is SB 2, which is also waiting on Governor Newsom's desk. Earlier this year, I think it was this year, winter, due to the Supreme Court decision, the California law for open carry was no longer considered constitutional. So that couldn't be enforced. So this is SB 2. It was authored by Portantino, who I got to talk to last spring about the very same bill. It reestablishes, instead of basing open carry on a person's character, it bases it on very obvious things like age, and you have to have a minimum of 16 hours of firearm safety course. In the past, it was a maximum of 16 hours. Why they put a maximum? I don't know.
You had too much practice.
But also, more than that, and you have to actually own the firearm that you are carrying. It can't be something that you borrow from someone. In all public places in the state of California. So it's always been outlawed in schools and courthouses, but now it includes the parking lot around the school, the sidewalk, the street in front of the school. It includes zoos, parks, museums, concert halls, libraries, public libraries, any place, and even businesses, unless the business puts a sign that firearms are allowed, which they are able to do. So those are two bills we want Governor Newsom to really sign. So send him a message and ask him to sign on there. SB 2 and AB 28.
Okay, so I guess that's it. Anybody else? Kyoko.
But also I go. Also I go.
Oh. Say goodbye, Kyoko.